Greetings, and here we have another tutorial on how to use a spreadsheet, in this case Microsoft Excel, which is the most common spreadsheet program around. And this exercise is designed to show you some of the very practical aspects of a spreadsheet, and we're going to consider how much a car really costs to operate. I had a family member once ask me, can I borrow your car for the summer? I'll pay you gas money. Well, cars cost a little bit more than gas money to operate. So we're going to look at the cost of a car from a perspective of total cost of operation. So let's start with the gas. We're going to do a separate calculation for the gas, and we're going to start with about how many miles you drive a year. Maybe you have a good idea of that. So let's say we're just driving 10,000 miles per year. Now remember, Excel does not understand units, so we're going to put the numbers in one column and units in a separate column. Sometimes we put them as a heading above a column. So that's 10,000 miles a year. Let's try to see how many miles that is per week. Well, there's 52 weeks in a year most of the time. We're going to do a separate calculation for that down here. So we have days per year, and that's actually on average 365.25. So every 4 years we have an extra day. So on average we have a quarter extra day per year. And then days per week is just a 7. So to widen that column, just double click right there, and for weeks per year we can take 365.25. Again, for formulas we type equals, and I can just click right here and divide by the number of days per week, and we'll get an average of 52.17, and so on and so forth. I'm going to take this and reformat it so I reduce the decimal, so about 52.2 weeks per year. And if you'll notice, I did this kind of backwards here. I started off with the numbers in this column and the units in that column. I'm going to switch these around. So I'm going to click and drag down here. I'm going to right click and cut, right click and paste. And then I'm going to drag and do all the same thing here. Right click, cut, right click, paste. And we have our numbers here. So if I want to do 10,000 miles per year and I want to find out how many miles I have per week, I type equals this number divide by the weeks in a year, which is this. And I will again make sure that this is properly formatted, because poor formatting makes you lose information. We want to simply say miles per week. Next, we want to put in how many miles we get on a gallon of gas. So maybe your car gets 25 miles per gallon, or MPG. And now we can figure out how many gallons we use every week. Simply go equals this many miles per week, divide by this many miles per gallon, and the units work out so that it's miles over weeks divided by miles over gallons. So gallons come up on top, weeks go on the bottom, and 7.67 gallons per week. Now comes the fun part where we estimate how many thousands of dollars per gallon this will cost. Oh, well, right now it's only about $4.10, which we'll call it cost per gallon. But that'll probably go up by the time you watch this. To find out your cost per week, we take the cost per gallon, we multiply it by the gallons per week. Cost per week, and that's just for the gas. One can go from one cell to the next very easily simply by pressing the tab key, or you can use the arrow keys. If you select a region, you can use the tab key to go from left to right, then top to bottom, and it'll keep going back like that. Or you can just click to where you want to go. Getting back to this, we now have our cost per week for gas. We can even calculate our cost per mile. So if we take the cost per gallon and we divide it by our miles per gallon, we get about 16 cents is our cost for gas. Alright, well, again, there's a lot more to paying for a car than just gas. So we have the purchase price of the car, there's insurance, there is gas, these are usually three of the big ones, then there's maintenance, and that could be tires and brakes, oil changes, and the like. And then there's repairs, which are a little more difficult to plan for, but one must still plan for them nonetheless. And then there are taxes and fees. Some people might have a problem with a lead foot or parking, so you might have to put tickets in there. Now we're going to do this on a weekly, monthly, and annual basis. Well, for the purchase price of the car, you should budget in your monthly payments. Maybe it's $250. We're going to go up here and make it into an accounting number here. Now if I type here, say insurance is annually $1,200, it's still going to come back without that. We'll have to reformat. But if I select this entire area, even before I enter any numbers in, I can make it this accounting format, and when I type in $1,200 there it goes. I can also select everything here and make it reduce the decimal place, so maybe I'm just dealing in dollars. I don't really need to know everything to the last penny. Okay, so annually this purchase price is going to be this. I'm just clicking on that, or I could type it in if I wanted to, times 12. Now weekly, again, we can simply take the annual and divide it by the number of weeks per year. So on a weekly basis, this is what we'll have to budget, $57. Now some might argue that, hey, I already have my car paid off, and so this monthly cost can go down to zero. And although that may very well be true, that you have yours paid off and you don't actually pay any monthly, you should still be saving up some money every month, because your car will not last forever. In fact, it might not last through the day, depending on how unlucky you are and how fast you drive. You should always be budgeting for either the previous purchase of the car, in other words, paying off the bank for it, or the future purchase of your car. Me, I like to save money, put it in the bank, and let me get at least a little bit of interest instead of paying the bank a lot of interest on a car. When it comes to insurance, usually that is a semi-annual cost, usually billed every 6 months. Some people pay it monthly, but you often have to pay an extra charge on that. So if you get billed, say, $600 every 6 months, you can simply type equals 2 times 600, and you end up with this. And then monthly equals that number, and sometimes I can just move around using the arrow keys instead of having to click. Take that divided by 12. I can type equals this divided by this. Now there's a problem if you wanted to simply drag down this purchase price down here, because something else is going to happen. We're dividing by 0. What happened here? Well, if you'll notice, this was I3 divided by B13. We click down here, which is fine. But if we drag down, this becomes I4 divided by B14. Both rows had 1 added to them from up here. There are 2 ways that we can solve this problem if we wanted to do more dragging down. This is a small example, so maybe it's not a big deal, but in a much larger spreadsheet, this could become a real pain. So we will do one of 2 ways. I'll do it this way first. If I want to save a row number in a formula, I can click right before that row number, in this case right before 13, and type a $sign. That will keep that row number from changing as you do a drag down. Ta-da! Notice how the row number stayed the same. You can actually do the same thing for a column label like B13. So I can drag this down, and then I could even drag this one across, and notice how B13 stays the same. This K changes. K6 will go to L6. There it is. And those continue to change to L9 and so on. But the B13 does not change. So that is one possible option. Another way of doing this is simply selecting the cell reference within the formula and typing the F4 key multiple times until you get what you want. That one will hold the row reference constant. That will hold the column reference constant. That one will hold neither, and that will hold both. And all I'm doing is pressing the F4 button as I have that selected. And in fact, I can do it for all of it. So I can select the I4. So anything that you select, that will happen to. So now we have another option. We can take this cell, change the name of it. Weeks per year. So I'm naming that cell weeks per year. If I use weeks per year right here, notice how it shows up here? I can just click on it, double click on it. Now, that is not a cell reference, that is a name. So it won't change if I do a fill down. There we go. As you can see up here, it's weeks per year. same thing, and so on. Okay, going back to gas though, we did figure out the cost of gas on a weekly basis. So we can just write over this, type equals that number. Okay, for maintenance, let's go and calculate that. So let's say oil changes and tires and brakes, and maybe throw in some etc. Now oil changes are going to be, say, about $30 every 3,000 miles. Well, how often do we hit 3,000 miles? So how much time will pass? Well, we can do that simply by going equals $30 times, well, we have 10,000 miles per year, divided by 3,000 miles per oil change. So this is going to tell us how much per year our oil changes are. Tires, maybe you replace them every 2 years and they cost $400, equals $400 divided by every 2 years. Brakes, obviously that's a tough one because it depends on if you're doing front, backs, rotors, drums, just the pads, but you should just assume maybe about $200 every 2 years. And some other basic maintenance, let's just say, you got wipers, you've got fluids, all that kind of stuff. Let's just say that's another $100 a year. So up here for maintenance, I'm going to click on annually. I'm going to say equals sum. So I'm going to sum these ones. All I did was click and drag, close parentheses, and there we go. And look, it pops it right here. And monthly is based on annually anyway. So I'm going to bring that down here. Now annually for the gas is going to equal this times weeks per year. So I can start typing weeks per year, and oh, here it is. So we end up with $1,640 per year in gas. That's a lot. Moving on to repairs. Well, we never know how much that's going to be. So we should throw in, say, an annual budget on repairs. This depends on how old your car is. Brand new car hopefully won't have too much. Myself, I'm going to put in $250 per year just to make sure I've got that covered. Taxes and fees, well, you've got registration, you've got inspection. Got to get a $30 inspection every year, and the registration's every 2 years, runs me $60. So I'm just going to say about $60 per year on that. And I don't get too many tickets. Maybe there's a parking ticket in there. So $20. And the monthly, I'm just going to drag that down as well. All right, now I want to kind of move this off to the side. I can either right click or I can use my Control X. Click there and paste, and I'm just going to move that off to the side. I can get back to that some other time when I need to. And I'm going to make my totals. And I'm going to use this Autosum thing now. And I'm just going to hold the Shift key and use my arrow keys, another way of selecting things, and then use Control R for control fill to the right, and all of that fills into the right. I'm going to go back and reformat all these because it seems we got Some of them got into the pennies anyway. That's okay. Just go to cost accounting there, move that back. We end up with annual cost of $6,070, weekly of 116. Well, all we have to do is one calculation of cost per mile, and that we take our weekly total costs, divide it by our weekly mileage. We end up with 61 cents per mile. Now, getting back to my family problem where I had the member say, "Oh, I'll give you gas money." They were offering to give me 16 cents per mile for something that actually costs 61 cents per mile. So they're giving me about take that divided by that. They're giving me about 27% of what it was actually going to cost to operate the car. Yes, gas is an important part of it, but there's a purchase price. Well, it could be argued that, say, I already owned the car and I didn't have to purchase it. But really, every mile that's driven on that car is another mile closer to getting a new car. So it really does cost money, purchase cost, and insurance. Well, you could argue, well, you have to pay the insurance anyway, but every mile driven on that car is more risk taken and more possibility of using that insurance. And it's pretty obvious that maintenance and repairs are part of the deal that go towards every mile is going to cost you in these things. But the only thing you might not be able to make an argument for perhaps are the taxes, the fees, and the registrations and so on. So, and those are a very small part of the whole package. So, getting back to the Excel, we're going to format this a little bit nicer here. And I'm going to select everything and double click in between the lines. And these all come into view. And if you want to make things smaller, just go down here. And there is another very simple, easy to use, very applicable example of how and why to use Excel. This really gives you an idea of how much it really costs to operate a car. If you can use public transportation instead and still do all the things you need to do, then you can maybe justify it if your costs come under $6,000. Finally, the great thing about a spreadsheet is that if it is programmed properly, you can make changes that are automatically updated to the rest of the spreadsheet. So, in fact, I don't usually drive 10,000 miles. I drive closer to 7,000 miles per year. And if I would put more air in my tires like they should have, maybe I can move up to 28 miles per gallon. Those two changes get reflected in our weekly totals. And my cost per mile actually went up. The reason for that is that my insurance didn't change, but my miles did. My miles went down, so I'm dividing by a smaller number. So it actually cost me more on average per mile to operate the car, which is kind of a strange way of looking at it. But if you think about it, if I only drove 1 mile every year, annually I'd pay that insurance over that 1 mile. Still, my total costs have gone down. You can go back to 10,000 miles and 25, and we can go back to my totals of $6,000. Whereas if I just drove 7,000 and put air in my tires, I'd save almost $600 throughout the year. You can take this and then copy it and apply your very own numbers. But most of the numbers that you'll run into that you'll need to change might be your miles per year, the mileage of your car, how much the cost of gas is, of course your insurance, and this is close to what I pay, and maybe your maintenance. Maybe you've got a more expensive car that'll require different tires, brakes, and so on. So those are the big ones. Over here there was a miss in that we did not format those appropriately, and just move the decimal places back. If I want to change the size of that column, just double click there. There are many other things that we can do to improve how this looks. I can take these headings and make them underlined. I can take these, make them italicized. There are certain headings that they have up here that you can look at. And some of them can actually change the color based on the amount or the percentage or so on. If they're negative, if they're positive, they can change color, or possibly the highlight or boldface. There are many formatting options. What's most important to me is to make sure that it is extremely useful, and that means using the formulas. And the formatting can be also quite useful to make sure that it shows up what you want it to show up and highlights the important parts. But that seems to me to be easier. So this was a simple, straightforward, but extremely useful example of how to use a spreadsheet.